Welcome to episode 53 of the Speed Secrets podcast. As you probably know, I publish an e-newsletter called Speed Secrets Weekly, and in most issues I have a guest contributor. Today's podcast guest, Peter Carroll, recently wrote an article for it that resulted in more positive feedback than any other article. So today I'm talking with him about 14 ways to improve your driving, the title and topic of his article.
Welcome to the Speed Secrets podcast. Join Ross Bentley and guests, drivers, instructors and coaches, engineers, officials, and others for conversations about high performance and race driving. Listen for tips and advice, thought-provoking ideas, and inspiration to take your own driving to the next level. Green, green, green!
Hi, and welcome to the show, everyone. Today I'm talking with Peter Carroll. Peter's article in issue 240 of Speed Secrets Weekly is, well, it's definitely one of the most popular ever. And I know that because of the number of emails I've received. I actually kind of got after Peter and said, "Oh, thanks, Peter. You gave me a bunch of work because I had to answer everybody's emails." Not that I'm complaining, but it was funny. I just got so much response from his article. So, hey, Peter, thanks for sharing that article in Speed Secrets Weekly, and welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. No problem.
In your article, you wrote about 14 different ways to improve one's driving. Basically, there were things that you see that drivers do that are, I guess, they're mistakes, right? And I know that really resonated with many people reading the articles, subscribers who, I guess, they recognize themselves in the list. Either they were doing those things or had in the past, and that was I guess that's why that made it so valuable, because it made drivers think of going, "Oh, am I doing that?" Or, "Oh yeah, I remember doing that. Maybe I better check, that I'm not doing that again." So I think that's why it was so hugely popular, and why I got so much great feedback on it. So I wanted to talk about some of those points that you mentioned in that article, and actually maybe one other topic that you and I have been trading emails on lately. So I thought we'd talk about those things in today's show. But I guess first, just tell listeners a little bit about your background in the sport, how long you've been performance and race driving, and then your experience as an instructor and a coach.
Okay. Well, basically, I didn't really get into this. As a kid, I was a big fan of motor racing for sure, and my father even had some sort of background in it. But I didn't really think much of this until I was around 35 years old, and a friend of mine had an old Porsche Turbo that he was selling. And he said, "Hey, you should buy that," because they didn't want much for them in those days. And so I bought it, and he said, "Well, now, you really should try driving it on the track." And I said, "Okay, I'll go to the Porsche Club once and see what it's all about." And I was like totally hooked. So basically, my background is enthusiast turn amateur driver, worked my way up through the Porsche Club and BMW CCA until I got to the point, I guess, after about 10 years, I had an opportunity to try racing. I never really felt like I needed to go racing until I tried. And then I tried, like, wow, this is fantastic. I'm going to have to go racing now. So between the club racing activities, instructing activities, that's sort of my summers. I go to work during the day, but I live for the weekends.
Yeah. No surprise to anybody listening to the show of how addictive this thing is. So, and you spend a lot of time in the right seat instructing drivers, right?
Yeah, actually, now that I've been instructing for probably 10 years, I've had this fabulous opportunity where I'm now the guy that gets to hop in with the really advanced students. They're not quite instructors yet. Sometimes it's evaluating to see if they should be an instructor. Sometimes I'm training potential instructors. But basically what I'm doing is I'm hopping in the seat with drivers that haven't had anybody in the seat for maybe 2 or 3 years sometimes. And just, you've been doing it so long by yourself, sometimes you forget what you knew before and pointing at little inefficiencies. But for me, it's a blast. It's absolute blast. And
I think that's, it's one of the things that, it can help you become a better driver too, right? Because you're there and you're watching what other drivers are doing, and it does make you think of, oh, am I doing that? And, you start questioning yourself. And that's, I know that's one of the reasons why a lot of people become instructors in this sport is because it helps them learn and helps them become a better driver. But you,
Oh, for sure. When I remember when I was a baby instructor, in the BMW CCA process, you're supposed to take your students for a ride to demonstrate why we're telling you to do what we're telling you to do. And I went through the keyhole at Mid-Ohio with this student, and he said, "Wow, that was really good. Can you tell me how you did that?" And I thought about it for a minute, and I had absolutely no idea how I did that. I just did it. So instructing forces you to deconstruct your own work, and if you have to teach someone how to do it, you have to figure out how you did it. And it's another angle of looking at your driving.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, I was also, I mean, we've all who spent time in the right seat have had a few moments where you're kind of like, why am I doing this? This is scary. You've had a few of those, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I said, for example, I remember I always, once an instructor grabbed the wheel on me in the 930 and nearly rolled the car. And I swore as an instructor, I would never, ever, ever do that to a student. But then I remember another time with a student in a 930 going down corner 2 at Mosport, and you lifted right after the bump. Ooh. And the thing started to rotate. And I didn't grab the wheel, but my hand was like 3 millimeters from grabbing the wheel. He did catch it just in time.
Yeah.
But even though I never said I would do that, I said I would never, ever do that, the hand was there.
Yeah. Instinct. And
yeah.
And I know that everybody's got different opinions on the whole grabbing the wheel. And I think that if an instructor beforehand explains to a student that, at some point, I may touch the wheel, I may not, I'll never ever grab it. I may just kind of help, touch it with 2 fingers. I've always said, never ever, as an instructor, never ever, grab the wheel any more than with just 2 fingers. So you're kind of just helping guide it. But I've always said, you are in control. I may just help sort of guide the wheel a little bit with 2 fingers. And, but I never touch the wheel without saying to the student, this is what I'm doing. So it should never come as a surprise, but, when instinct kicks in, so self-preservation kicks in, you're like, oh, well, let me help you with that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite interesting.
I got to think that, in a 930 coming up over the hill and down into turn 2 and the big lift, that's going to be a big moment. So I'm sure my hand would be over there next to the wheel anyway. So
it's an interesting topic in itself right there. There's a lot of resistance to getting in the right seat of cars these days.
Yeah.
And some of that is driver attitude. Some of that is the cars are just too damn fast.
Yeah.
But I think it's a pretty sad thing, actually, because for me, there is so much to gain from being in the right seat. You just have to trust the guy beside you. I'm basically lending you my nerve endings for the duration of the session. And it's amazing the stuff you can learn from someone who actually can give you the feedback of what they're feeling. How on earth do you do that from the side of the track?
I love that, lending you my nerve endings. I love that. That's a great way of looking at it. And for me, because I've spent a ton of time in the right seat, years in the right seat, going around tracks with drivers. But I've also done an awful lot of coaching from the side of the track because I've, through the years, done an awful lot of coaching of drivers in cars that you cannot get into the car with them, single seaters, open wheel cars, that kind of thing. So, there are pros and cons, and, I think you're right. I mean, it's become a pretty topical topic, controversial even. Again, there are pros and cons to it. For sure, I think that, for somebody starting out, I can't think of a better way to help a new driver to get in there and just, be able to do it real time and talk to the student. And to me, the key to this whole thing, the key to that is you have to work with the student from the beginning. And I have been put into situations, especially recently, where I've had to get into a right seat of a car with somebody who's pretty experienced, or, they've had a number of days on track, and it's kind of just, I get slapped in the right seat, and I haven't had a chance to work with the student from the beginning of the day. It's just, I get in, and it's kind of like, well, get in, give me the quick fix. And that's not a great way, because I haven't, I guess both ways, we haven't built a respect and a trust for each other. And, if I work with a student from the very beginning of the day and we start off relatively slow and work through the day, I feel really confident that I can control the car and the driver. But if I'm just slapped in there for a quick fix, that's no way of, I don't, the driver hasn't built trust with me yet. So that's a tricky thing.
That sounds like a typical day for me.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, the good news is I don't have to do report cards for all these guys, because at the end of 2 days and you've done 12 drivers, it's how on earth do you keep that straight?
Yeah. But I think that's the key, though, is you need to be able to spend enough time with the driver to be able to, again, for them to instill some confidence in you, and then you can really, really work with them. But if it's just a quick fix, that's a difficult thing. So I'm glad you're able to do it. That's a big challenge.
Yeah, I'm sort of looking at it like my job for these one-shot, one-session runs is you're almost trying to calibrate all their senses. They're doing what they're doing and they're feeling what they're feeling, and you have to sort of point out, this is efficient, that's inefficient. A big one I get is just the side loading of a car, and how much of that is fast and how much of that is actually braking. And it's been very effective. Like, I've had people come back to me and say, like, that was the best run I've had in a long time, and that you totally transformed my driving. And for me, that's like the most fun I could possibly have as an instructor for the day, is to have a guy come back, say, a year later and say, you transformed my driving. I had one at Mosport this summer where he said, you went with me last year, you changed a bunch of stuff, I've been practicing it, can you come with me again? And I went out with him, and it was perfect. Like, everything he did was perfect. Like, that was spectacular. What can I change? What can I improve? You can't.
keep doing more of the same.
Yeah, just keep doing it.
Yeah.
It was quite spectacular.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, and that is why we do. That's why anybody instructs or coach, right? It's the thrill of seeing them.
I think I told him, your job now is to go racing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's one way of taking your track driving to the next level, and that's to go racing, where you never get a chance to drive I shouldn't say you never. Less often do you get a chance to drive the ideal line, and you get pushed offline, or you're moved in a different position, and you learn so much more by doing that. So, yeah, different deal. So, so let's, and based on that experience, that's where, your article came from, right? It's just, you kind of cataloged, I guess, 14 different things that you saw people do. And, you started off by, what was the first one? It says, braking, mostly braking too much.
Well, where this came from for me was, I keep doing these checkout rides, and these were the recurring theme that I kept coming across. And I was also asked, as part of the BMW CCA, I do the classroom sessions for the advanced group, or the solo group, which is sort of above the advanced group. And I was running out of topics, so here you go. When I ride with you guys, this is what I generally see. So why don't I just give you my list now, and you can go out and self-diagnose? And they absolutely loved it. So that was sort of where the list came from. And then writing it for you, I really enjoyed, frankly, because it made me sort of flesh out the ideas in my head. Yeah. And it really, it helped.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons why one of the benefits of writing, I think, is it helps you get clear on things. But yeah, I mean, the very first point you talked about was braking, and I would say that braking is kind of generally it's the last thing that drivers get right.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that also is through the progression of being taught. When you're a beginner student, they teach you the really, really, really safe way. And they never really put much emphasis on when it's time to stop doing it that way.
Yeah.
They sort of run you up through the groups, through the driving school groups, but they don't necessarily teach you different technique, which I find strange.
Well, then there's a topic that just, I can get on a soapbox about is there's a lot of groups and or instructors who kind of go, well, I'm going to teach you, essentially what they're saying is, I'm going to teach you the wrong way at the beginning, because you're not capable of doing it the right way. So I'm going to teach you the wrong way of doing things for a while, and then eventually when you get more experience, then I'll teach you the right way. And I just don't agree with that approach. I mean,
I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's like teach people the right things from the very beginning, build good habits, and then just refine it. Now, you may have to simplify those things. Like, we don't have to get into what typically are called advanced techniques right away, but the whole trail braking thing. I mean, there's a lot of people that say, well, never teach trail braking to a novice. Well, okay, so don't. just tell them to have them release the
Brake
brake pedal
smoothly.
smoothly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I've done exactly that, and you get a beginner student who's never been on the track before, and they instinctively do it. I'm not going to stop them.
Yeah.
If they're instinctively doing something right, then I'm just going to move on to the next topic and let them keep doing it.
Yeah, yeah. And then as, when their experience level is ready for it, I mean, that's when you kind of go, okay, now let's fine tune that. Hey, what you're doing there is your trail braking, and, here are the benefits, and here's how you can use it or use it more or less to help you. So, yeah.
Yeah, and part of the problem I had with writing this article is a lot of the stuff that I had on my list were very Mosport specific, because that's where most of my instructing goes on. And I had to dummy them down. But some things like, for example, Mosport Corner 8, where the hump used to be, and people like to brake before the hump because it's a blind, fast corner. And the correct way to do it is you brake after the car settles, after the hump, and then it's a whole lot better. Well, a beginner student, you're not going very fast. So why teach them to be afraid of what they can't see when you can just let them drive in at normal road speed? They can see the corner, okay, brake here, and they can do it properly. And if they start doing it properly at the beginning stages at road speeds, once they become an advanced, it's all in there. It's all programmed.
Yeah.
To try to teach them to brake before the blind corner, go in slow. Oh, there it is. And try to brake that later when they're going fast is really, really difficult.
Yeah, for sure. It's easier to build good habits from the beginning rather than break bad habits. So
yeah, they're going slow. So slow is the best time to learn.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and that leads to that, the email discussion that you and I have been having, specifically about, you mentioned, turn 8, 9, 10, kind of the S's at Mosport, where there's kind of this classic old school line through there of very late apexes everywhere. And, a lot of people go, well, it's the safe school line. Well, turning the wheel more than necessary isn't necessarily safer.
Yeah, I've been struggling with that with students and even with other instructors for years, and so say the Porsche Club has the official curriculum for Mosport that's got all the corners described, but the stuff was written back in the 80s, and the track has changed several times since the 80s. And what they describe in that book is basically late apex, late apex, late apexes. And the problem I have with that is if you take a modern, soft, a very heavy, very soft street car, like a stock 911, and you go through there with a really soft suspension, you end up with these big swoopy lines with massive weight transfers and big snaps. And when the car snaps, when the weight goes from one side to the other side, it's quite violent. And so I was taught years and years and years ago by one particular instructor is, well, just don't do it like that. Do it like this. And holy smokes, that's easy. I can do that. There's no snap. There's no loading. It's a shorter distance. It's all fantastic. And then I went and looked at YouTube. What are the IMSA guys doing? Well, they're all doing that.
Yeah.
So I really wonder, like, where does this stuff come from? I came across, I think I sent it to you. There was a picture of Bob Bondurant, probably in the early 70s, with a chalkboard drawing exactly the same scenario, showing exactly the same late apexes. So I'm really curious historically where this stuff came from, because I don't think it works today.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, starting students off with a later apex than an earlier one it's not a bad thing, but it can be way overdone. And I think, again, it's that, the thinking of, well, we'll teach you this when it's really not quite right, but we'll teach you this now because you're not ready for the right stuff. I think to me, that's flawed thinking. I mean, it's the wrong approach. And so I think, as we've been talking about by email, I think there's a couple things going on there. One is the, kind of the old school thinking of, we'll teach students this, what they think is the safe line. And then I think you bring out another really good point is, cars have changed and the way they work better now. I mean, it used to be that cars accelerated better than they cornered. Nowadays, cars that corner so well, it's okay to spend a little more time in cornering. And, you mentioned that about, even the approach to the S's at VIR is the same. And, I think the same kind of approach happens at Sonoma and any of those kind of places where you've got a series of corners where, it's always this very late apex. Well, you can go too far with that. And you're right. Then it gets the car all snappy and bouncing, and yeah, not a good thing.
And for Mosport, that corner 9, which is the middle of the S's, is the biggest corner for accidents. And basically what it is you load up the car too much, you get on the gas too much with a car that's already heavily loaded, and if anything goes wrong, there's concrete on the left, there's concrete on the right. It's not going to end well. So my version, the way I like to teach people, and S's like that is, you feel the weight transfer of the car. It's like a big pendulum swinging, and the pendulum swings over here, the pendulum swings over there. And when you start into the S's, you should feel the pendulum swinging, and then just let it keep swinging. It swings from left, it swings to right, it swings left again, and it don't interrupt the weight transfer. And if you do it, it's so much little work for the car to do.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Is help the car do less work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I went through my article again. A lot of what I teach, I think, it's the feel. It's not so much do this, but you feel the car doing that. You feel what the car did there, and trying to help the student calibrate their nerve endings to sense what I'm sensing. Sometimes you feel fantastic G loading, and all it is slowing down. It's scrubbing. And I try to teach students, okay, you feel that? Okay, well, that was braking. It feels like accelerating, but it's actually a braking force. And I want them to sort of feel guilty when they get into that feeling. So now when they go into a corner, they go, oh, okay, that's too much. Okay, not so much. That's good. And sort of feel the efficiency. And I think too much of instructing has been based on do this versus feel this. And this, I'll give credit to you. I mean, a lot of this I think I got from your books, because you're one of the few authors I think that spend time on that stuff.
And I think so. A couple of thoughts there. I mean, I'm looking at your bullet points, or the points in your article, and I mean, the very first one is braking too much. And you're right. I think we in the beginning, a lot of novices show up and they don't brake hard enough because they just they've never braked hard in their car on the street. So they do need to kind of get a feel for how hard can you brake. But then the whole in slow out fast thing gets driven into their head almost too much, I think. And you're right. I mean, they don't get a feel for keeping the car balanced and it's a it's like paint by numbers. It's drive by numbers. Do this, number one. Do this, number two, rather than the feel it flow through the corner. And I think obviously I agree with you. But I got to ask, Peter. I mean, has that worked for you with every driver? I mean, have you found drivers who, they're less kinesthetic kind of people? They're less about the feel and more about what does this look like? Have you ever had struggles with that?
I have. You do get the occasional people that another sport beckons. One guy in particular I had a couple of years ago had a BMW 7 Series in the pouring rain, and all I could tell him was line up the car on the black strips, follow the black strip through the corner, because that's all there was going to be.
Yeah.
And in situations like that, sometimes it's just not a teachable situation. It's just a survival situation. So you flip into, I just want this guy to enjoy his weekend. He's never going to be Mario Andretti. Make sure the guy has a good time.
Yeah.
And keep him safe.
Yeah. Actually, and I'll say, I mean, I've had a number of those students through the years where you're like, oh, this guy's just not getting it. And, but a year later or 2 years later, you see them and they did get it. Like something clicked with them at some point in time. And, I don't know if it was a, different instructor, different approach, just one of those big aha moments or what, but every now and then it does click. And,
seat time.
Yeah. And it's different for every person, obviously. But, I guess, when I look at your article, I mean, I can see the theme of feel it come through. I mean, drivers who brake too much.
Big thing that I really try to focus on is why.
Yep.
And, we've all had instructors throughout our driving career as we came up. And I'm an engineer by training, so I'm really interested in how things work. Mm-hmm. And for me to understand, don't just do this, but why am I doing it like that? And if someone tells you to do something, don't just believe them, ask them to explain why. And because if you understand, for example, on a given corner, do it this way, that will only really help you with that one given corner. But if you can understand why you're doing it that way, then that should map into any corner on any racetrack in the world.
Yes.
You know, and don't, I'm a firm believer in not driving by memorization. I think a lot of us go to one track for most of our career and we just memorize it and we forget about learning. We're not learning anymore. We're just regurgitating what we've learned. But really, I think understanding is the important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I'm looking at your article, and you know, number 4 was shifting unnecessary downshifts. I mean, that's a classic of, well, everybody takes whatever, you know, turn 3 and third gear. Well, why? You know, maybe it works in that car, maybe it doesn't in your car. And by the way, you know, downshifting for the sake of downshifting because the engine sounds more buzzy and it makes you feel like you're going fast isn't necessarily faster. I'm a great believer in, you know, do the least amount of shifting as possible, and in fact, run in as tall a gear as possible through corners. And it's amazing how many times I'll suggest to a driver, you know, you take that corner in, you know, typically in third gear, try it in fourth gear, and they come back and go, oh no, that's slower, it just doesn't work. Well, actually, you know, segment time, you're actually faster through there in fourth gear. What? Well, it doesn't feel as fast. Yeah, you're right. It doesn't feel as fast, but it is faster because, and then, like you said, I think you need to calibrate the feel to, just because it doesn't like squirt out of the corner doesn't necessarily mean that you're not feeling going faster. You should be able to feel that you're also carrying more speed as well, the momentum. So, yeah.
I had a big debate with my wife over that exact scenario. Corner 3 at Mosport, which is really just a horrible corner. There's nothing really good about it.
Except when you get it right.
Well, even then, it's just the corner kind of sucks. It's sort of in fast, off camber exit, and just nothing seems to work there. And I was going in, I would go down to, my wife and I share an M3 sometimes, and we've got a data logger. And I believe in logging absolutely everything because you just never know what you might learn. She was riding with me, and I went in there, and I would go down to third gear for corner 3, and then I would be upshifting coming out of the corner. And she said, you know, I think you'd be faster in fourth gear. And I said, well, no, I know for sure I have to go down to third gear because I need the torque to get the car to rotate properly. And this is faster. And she said, I don't think you're right. So at the end of the day, we went back and we checked the data. She was right. So basically, if you overlay our data on top of each other, the way she was doing it, I was actually faster up. I'd gained about a second on her by corner 3. And by the time I exited corner 3, I gave it all back.
Wow.
So by downshifting, I lost a whole second. And to me, I swear on my mother's, that it was absolutely faster. It was for sure faster, and I had to do it. And I almost even shut her down, like, no, it's just not true. And she looked at the data, and boy. So data logging. There's a big issue. There's a big issue with this in the schools because a lot of the driving schools, the insurance does not allow timing devices, and we have a big controversy over what is a timing device and what isn't a timing device. But if anyone can, I strongly recommend you must run a data logger because you never know what you might not be realizing.
Yeah, and the fact that I mean, it used to be that, you know, if you didn't have $5,000, you couldn't buy a decent system. Well, now, I mean, they're so inexpensive, and even to the point of some, you know, the apps on smartphones are helpful. You know, sure, you're not logging everything, but it's all helpful. So, as long as, and this is a big pet peeve of mine, is, you know, I also see people that buy data systems, install them in their cars, and then don't make the time or don't have the time or don't have the knowledge to be able to really use it. So it becomes a really expensive stopwatch and or a weight ballast.
No, I see lots of people, and if they do it, you're right, they just use it for just the lap time, but there's so much more in there than just a lap time. The ones I found particularly valuable are the ones where you can combine the video with the telemetry.
Yes.
You know, another situation at Watkins Glen during a club race, and I had video and the lap and the data logger synchronized. And I was going into a corner. I had one particular lap that didn't feel very special to me, but it was a half a second faster than I'd ever gone before. and I couldn't figure out what did I do differently. And so I looked at the data and broke it all down. And I did a different line going into the chute. So in the chute at Watkins Glen, which is after the outer loop, people would tend to go very deep in the corner and go through, it's a left-hander, as a late apex so they can get on the gas early. And I didn't do that. I went down to the apex early and hugged the apex all the way around, and I gained a half a second. And obviously the reason is I drove a shorter distance. Didn't feel fast, but it was. And I couldn't figure out, like, why would I even do that? And because that's not what I would normally do. And I looked at the video, and I was passing a car on the inside.
Right.
He told me, hey, go pass me on the inside. I said, okay, I'll go down the inside and I'll pass you there. Never occurred to me to do that before, but it was a half a second.
Wow.
And that was a half a second, obviously, working through traffic too. That was the fastest lap of the race.
Wow.
So you just never know what you might be missing if you're not logging it.
Yeah. And, that brings up one of your points in your article is about the line and the distance and stuff like that. I actually think that's again, as cars' cornering power improve, it used to be that, we'd always drive these lines that were just basically making the track into as many drag strips as possible, the very late apexes. But when the cornering power of cars improve, that means you can spend more time in a corner, which might mean that, even though it's not as late at an apex and all that kind of stuff, you can actually, the shorter distance helps you. And I see a lot of that. And I've recently been working with a lot of different drivers on, looking at the track and just going, what's the shortest distance? I think it's one of the things that, drivers who autocross, they learn a lot about is, often it's the shortest distance that wins. So I think it's an important thing to look at. And again, it kind of ties back to the conversation about, S's like 8, 9, 10 at Mosport, the S's at VIR, Sonoma, stuff like that, where, you can start to think about is what's the shortest distance? What's the shortest way of getting through this thing as well? I actually think looking at data, one of the great things about data is you can, you can look at the total distance that you drove over the course of a lap. And it's interesting to look at that and compare lap to lap, how much of a difference that can make by changing the line a little bit.
Yeah, I remember going to Sebring, racing at Sebring years ago, and everyone at Sebring would go deep into corner one and then turn left. And the number of cars you could pass by just going down the inside of corner one at Sebring was spectacular.
Yeah.
So it's, but again, if you don't have the means of measuring these things, exit speed is one way to measure, but there are so much better means of measuring these things. I also find even the predictive lap timing really, really valuable, because you'll come out of every corner and you have an instant reference as to did that work or did that not work. You come through a corner, your butt says that was fantastic. You look down, oh, that's not so good.
Right.
Or you come out of a corner, I didn't feel very good. Wow, how did I do that?
Yeah.
Your butt will lie to you sometimes.
Yeah. And actually, you bring up a good point of the, for years, and it's still something that I use, and I still coach drivers to use is, that whole, you come out of a corner, you find a spot down the following straightaway, you check your RPM or your speed, depending on what you've got there. And, you kind of go, okay, I'm 50 RPM or 100 RPM higher, or, 3 miles an hour faster here than I was in the previous lap. That meant that I got a better exit out of that corner. That means I'm faster getting around the track. Well, again, not necessarily. I think it used to be more so, but again, as cars have greater cornering power, the trade-off between cornering speed and straightaway speed is it's shifted. I would say it's shifted for sure. It has shifted somewhat, not totally, but somewhat in the 40 years that I've been on tracks. I think for sure 40 years ago, it was all about the exit speed and that straightaway speed. It's becoming less of that because of the speed that you're able to carry through corners now. So I think it's, I'm not suggesting that everybody, just wail on into every single corner with massive corner entry speed and then, totally suck getting out of the corner. That's not the way to do it. But the whole in slow out fast is certainly been overdone.
Yeah, the straight line speed certainly hasn't suffered lately, but the cornering speed has certainly come up.
Yeah.
One of the problems I have, and actually this comes from my own background. I started driving an old 911 turbo that towards its final iteration was probably making close to 700 horsepower.
Wow.
But still, it's a vintage car. It had a good vintage suspension, but it's still a vintage car. Then when that was not working, I would also drive an M3, which didn't have the kind of straight line power, but still had quite good cornering power. And one of the things I keep telling people when you hop in, say, a GT3 RS, is they're using the power to their own disadvantage. Basically, they're going down the straight so ridiculously fast that they're terrified by the time they get to the corner, and they have to slow down too much because it's just too much for them. And I'll have to instruct, anybody can go fast down the straight, but it's the corners that count. 3/4 of our lap is actually spent in the corners, not in the straights. So sandbag on the straight, do whatever you got to do to be comfortable going into the fast corners, and then focus on doing the fast corners right. And then later on, just use the speed to fast forward through the boring parts, or the power.
Yeah.
But you get between the GT3s and the Corvettes and the Vipers, it's all horsepower all the time. And then they start modifying engines and going even faster in a straight line, but they're not going that fast overall. It's the guys that are really, truly impressive you get the people in the Miatas that don't have any power, and they have to drive 10/10ths through the corners because that's all they got. Those guys are learning at a much faster rate than the guys in the super high-powered supercars.
Yeah, and there's nothing like the smile of a Miata driver who has just passed somebody in whatever, with lots of horsepower. So
I learned a lot by going back and forth between the two. I had an old 911 turbo and I had an M3, and I would drive them back to back. One weekend I'll drive the turbo, then the next weekend it's broken, I'll drive the M3. And so the M3 would teach me about momentum, and then I would take what I learned about momentum, hop back in the turbo, and apply momentum. So I would drive it as a momentum car and fast forward through the straights. And that was spectacular.
Yeah, I've been telling a story a couple of years ago, I guess, a year ago, 2 years ago, I can't remember when it was. I was doing a program at an event, and I had a group of drivers of, I don't know, about 6 or 8 drivers, and I'm doing a little briefing with them before they go on track, and I go, okay, who's driving a momentum car? And a guy puts his hand up. He's got I think it was an Honda S2000 or a Miata or something, and somebody in a 1 Series BMW, and then I looked around the other people, and this one guy was quite proud to say that no, he's driving a 640 horsepower Corvette, so he's not driving a momentum car. And as we went along during the day, and I worked with him on his brake release and rolling speed into the corner, and how you can use that to actually, how you can use the release of the brake to actually help you get to full throttle sooner by helping you get to rotate the car and everything, while carrying momentum. He comes to me, he's all excited, and he says, we got to look at the video and the data, and because I had this one great lap, and he come out of this one corner, and his rolling speed through the middle of the corner in a relatively slow corner, like a 40 mile an hour corner, was 2 miles an hour faster. So percentage wise, that's a pretty big difference. And the speed difference at the end of the straightaway was massive because he started to accelerate at the same place, but from 2 miles an hour faster. And it made a huge difference in his lap time and that straightaway speed. And his takeaway, it was, hey, I guess I'm driving a momentum car after all. So,
for sure.
Yeah, I think just because you got a lot of horsepower doesn't necessarily mean you're not driving a momentum car. Like you said, I think you can rely on it, on the horsepower to get you out of trouble.
It's like absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah.
So do not be corrupted by the power. Yeah.
So, Peter, I'm just going to kind of wrap up and then touch on one last point here. Your article, I'm just going to quickly go through. Your number one was braking, mostly braking too much. Okay, so that's the kind of the feel and balancing the car. Trail braking, either not trail braking or probably taught never to trail brake. But
trail braking is a trouble one because even at very, very qualified instructor level, I get so many different definitions of what is trail braking that I don't think it's actually well understood.
Yeah. So define it.
You're braking into a corner.
Thank you.
Anything that works.
Yeah, I've had drivers go, oh well, I didn't brake all the way to the apex, so I'm not trail braking. That's not the definition of trail braking. If you're braking all the way to the apex, yes, you are trail braking. But if your foot's on the brake, 1 inch past the turning point, you're also trail braking.
Or I've had people say, don't tell them to trail brake because all you're doing is you're pitching the car sideways. Well, you're trail braking too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't left foot brake, so I can't trail brake. No.
That's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So trail braking is, it's just
Much understood.
Yeah. And all it is meant to do is to help manage the weight, to help you get the car to turn the way you want. And if you do it the right way, you're using up more of the tire's capabilities. There you go, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Number 3 was throttle. Too much gas too early, sawing on the gas. You see a lot of drivers who just, they get into a corner, usually because they've overslowed, right?
Yeah, and I've also seen it as a historical technique where people who were big in the 80s say, no, you're on the gas, off the gas, on the gas, off the gas, and that's just the way to be on both sides of too much, too little, but it's not efficient. Right. So that could be another one of those historical aspects. But I always would argue that, a little bit too much or a little bit too little would be much better than sawing on and off, sawing the car through the corner.
I've had a number of people send me emails asking me questions. I have this Ask Ross column on my website, and I've had a number of people send me emails saying, I've watched videos of Ayrton Senna, and I hear him on and off the throttle, just like bap, 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 going through the corner. Well, first of all, most of those were him driving in a turbo with a turbo engine that had terrible turbo lag. So he was trying to keep the turbo spooled up. And just because he did it doesn't mean that you should do it. So
the other variation on that I've heard a lot is you wiggle the steering wheel in the corner because it helps you find the line versus and professionals do that. You see a professional going through the corner and they're wiggling the steering wheel. So are they wiggling the steering wheel because they don't know where the limit is, or are they wiggling the steering wheel in response to losses of grip events?
Yes.
And I think in general, you got to be really careful when you're a third person observing something, that if you're not in the car and you don't feel what the car is doing, just because they're wiggling the steering wheel doesn't mean that they're not aware of this fixing any specific problem.
Thank you for that. One of my pet peeves is people that drive through the corner and just purposely saw at the wheel because they're like, well, I see drivers doing that all the time. Well, it's a response, not it's a response, not an input. So,
yeah. Or the other variation on that is the standing at the side of the track, watching where the brake lights come on. But unless you're in the car, you don't know how much pressure to turn the brake lights on. It could be like almost nothing.
Yep.
It could be the guy stood on the brake pedal. So you can't determine just from where the brake lights come on what the guy was doing as he entered the corner.
Yeah.
I had one student once follow me into a corner. I said, well, watch where my brake lights come on as I trail brake into this corner. And he said, well, your lights didn't come on. Well, that's how much I was braking. My foot was on the brake, but it wasn't enough to hit the brake switch.
Yeah. 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 You got to be careful what you're looking or what you're seeing. So, we touched on the shifting, unnecessary downshifts, cheating the corner. That's the whole, I call it crabbing into the corner, but it's basically pulling away from the edge of the track, right?
Absolutely. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Do not turn until it's time to turn.
And I don't know about your experience. My experience is you see that more approaching really fast corners because, it's big and scary out there.
It's anxiety, and they're having fun. They're getting ahead of themselves, but you do have to finish your work before you start the next bit.
Yeah.
It's if you're at that point, that's great. It's an easy one to fix. It's not the biggest vice, but why make the corner any tighter than it needs to be?
Yep. Coasting, don't just sit there, do something. This is an interesting one because I agree, no coasting, but there are some cars that you need to hesitate for a fraction of a second from the moment that you come off the brake pedal to when you go start to feed in the throttle. Because if you feed in the throttle immediately, which kind of goes back to your third point of sometimes too early on the throttle, is if you go on immediately, it kind of transfers some weight to the rear, the front starts to push just a tiny little bit, and then actually it delays you getting back to full throttle, right? So
yeah. The big thing for me is the car has to be balanced, and there are what I see a lot of in students is they're approaching a corner. It's really, really fast. They're anxious about the corner, so they just leap off the gas, and the car just wallows in whatever state it feels like being in, until they get to the point of getting on the gas. And in that sort of arbitrary state of balance, it isn't going to be very predictable. It isn't going to be confidence inspiring. So if rather than doing that, just get on less gas, stay on the gas, but less gas, or get on a little tiny bit of brakes, not a lot of brakes, but just enough just to stabilize things. So at least you know where the set is.
Yeah.
But for sure, I won't argue that every single situation for every single car requires it.
Yeah.
But it's a crutch that people sort of fall back on, and they claim it's because, oh, they're more comfortable this way. But in actual fact, if you're on something a little bit, you'd be more comfortable that way.
Yeah.
The car would feel better.
Yeah, and the biggest coasting error that I see is drivers that come up, they're full throttle down the straightaway, and then they lift off the gas, coast for a while, and then brake. And it's that habit they built from driving on the street. So, charging a corner was a good one. Fighting the car, pinching, holding the car in, good one. Turning too much, where are you in the traction?
Well, actually, on the fighting the car, one of the things that I found the data logger again helped me is high-speed sweepers. If you're going in on really good R compound or slicks, and you go in fast and you hold on for dear life and you go, wow, the car is sticking, this is absolutely fantastic. That doesn't necessarily mean it was fast. And I've looked at the data logger again and goes, wow, that felt really, really fast, but really all I was doing is scrubbing all the way through the corner. So it's can be another example of less is actually more.
Yeah, scrubbing is not a good thing.
Yeah, but you can't. It's really hard sometimes to tell whether it's scrubbing or whether it's cornering, and even an experienced person can't necessarily tell. This is where data is really useful.
Right. Which a lot of things we've talked about kind of leads to your very, very last point in the article, and that is never stop experimenting. And I think we've touched on that or talked around that a lot, and that is you get somebody that says, well, you always do it this way. You always late apex here. You always brake here. You always, never stop experimenting. Now, the sport can be a little risky. So experiment in a smart way, right?
Oh, for sure. If you're going to change something, you have to slow down. You're going to go from unconscious driving to conscious driving. And if you're going to be teaching yourself consciously, you need to do it at a speed where you can do it.
Yeah.
You don't just, I tried once left foot braking in corner one at Mid-Ohio after a start, and that in mid-pack, and it wasn't really the best place to try that.
For the first time, yeah.
Yeah. The car needed it, yes, but that wasn't the right place to do it. It turned out okay. If you're going to change something, you have to slow down and do it at a speed where you can actually do it, and then work your way back up carefully.
Right.
Yeah. But even going back to data again, one of the guys I club race with said, hey, I haven't been to Mosport in a couple of years. Would you mind sending me some data? And so I looked at my data, and the data logger the previous year hadn't worked properly. And I went back for 2 years ago, looked at the data, and I said, you know what? I don't do that anymore. So you never stop changing. Yeah. There's always something else.
Yeah, which, my favorite saying, there's always more, meaning there's always more to learn. There's always some other different way. And, it's kind of like you can't take turn one flat. Actually, we just haven't figured out how to take turn one flat yet.
Yeah, it's just you're not thinking about it the right way.
Yeah. We haven't figured out how to do that yet. That's the,
And that's it's a huge psychological thing. That's something I spend a lot of time on with people is your fears make you feel this is something I'm not willing to do. So again, another Mosport-ism is corner four at Mosport. Everybody brakes or lifts at the top of corner four to sort of settle the car before you go over the top of the hill. In Mosport, corner four is the fastest corner on the track. It's downhill, it's off camber, it can be off camber, and it's blind. And one of the things I found really interesting goes back to the data logger again. I blew an engine going down corner four a couple of years ago, and the rod came through the block, oiled everything. The car did a 360 down the hill. I landed in the gravel trap, staring at the marshals. I didn't hit anything. How did I not hit anything? It's a corner. I should have hit something. And I went back to the data logger, and my steering angle was only, I think, like 1.5 degrees. And really? So it's a straight. 1.5 degrees is not that significant.
Yeah.
So the line that I was doing was so straight-ish because the banking on the inside of the corner takes radius out of the corner too. The line I was doing was so straight-ish, it gave me the confidence to say, I don't really need to brake or lift. I can just do it flat. And then I went out and practiced doing it flat. So going into the corner, I say, there is no hill. there's a corner and there's a hill. So forget about the hill. Visualize the blind corner. Okay, I see the blind corner. It's not really much of a corner. And I was then suddenly able to do it flat, where I could never do that before. And again, the data gave me the confidence and the understanding as to why that was a reasonable thing to do. And I've used that with some advanced students too, even people in, say, GT3 RSs, where they're braking and then getting back on the gas to go over the top of the hill, which is destabilizing the car somewhat into a fast off-camber corner. And I said, so just pick a throttle position. Don't, maybe not 100% for a GT3 RS, but pick a solid throttle position and just stay in it. And he came back later, you know what? That's so much more comfortable now. And he's faster.
That is such a important key thing. I mean, it's just you're keeping the car balanced. And again, it goes back to everything that you've said is it's all about the feel, right? And it's if you can keep the car's platform flatter, you've got more overall grip and your car is happier then. So, yeah, it's usually our reactions that get us into trouble. So,
but there's some really interesting psychology into how to get your brain to do something that it's pretty sure is not a good idea.
Yeah.
You know, and it took a near accident for my brain to be convinced that, you know, that actually wasn't such a big deal. and now I can do it all day long.
Yeah.
But before it's like, whoa, it's way too scary for me.
So what you're suggesting is that everybody should go out there and blow a hole through the side of their engine and learn a lesson that way, right?
It was actually quite interesting because the connecting rod went through the battery cable, which then started an electrical oil fire.
Ah.
But we have this strange rule in the Porsche Club that you have to have a fire extinguisher. So after the track was cleared and there was still smoke coming out, I just put my fire out.
Huh. That's back when I was doing Indy cars. I mean, you know, it was the Ford Cosworth engine and the Chevy Ilmore engine, and you know, you never ever, if somebody had a mechanical, you know, an engine blow up, never ever would you say that the engine blew up. And you know, there was always the jokes of, well, we ran out of fuel. Really? Yeah. The fuel ran out the side of the block when the piston went through the side of it. Or we had an electrical problem. The connecting rod took out the starter motor.
So the connecting rod took up my battery, shorted my battery cable, so it was an electrical problem.
You had an electrical problem. There you go.
Yeah. But I find one of the things most fascinating about this hobby is how much psychology there is in it. And I think you've done a really amazing job in all of your background with your books of just teaching the psychology aspect of it. I mean, a lot of these books cover the same topics, but I don't think I've seen any other ones that cover how psychological aspects of it, like the feel and the mood and the brain stuff. And so a lot of what I'm teaching, I think, came from stuff that I read in your books.
Well, hopefully it's helped. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's your brain that's driving your car. So it's your brain that's telling you to keep the car at the edge of the track and not crab in. It's your brain that's telling your foot to trail off as you can enter a corner. I mean, it's all that stuff. So
if you make your brain happy, then you'll just do a better job.
Yeah. And sometimes that's all it is just make sure that your brain is happy when you show up at the track, which typically isn't a hard thing to do. I mean, you're at a racetrack. I mean, how can your brain not be happy? But stress, tension, there's a lot of that on the track, and just learning how to manage that and relax your mind, that's a huge part of it. So
yeah, and it's supposed to be fun, so don't push yourself so much that it ceases to be fun. And if you just relax a bit and take it easy and have more fun, you will probably perform much better.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to what you said earlier about the fellow that was really struggling. Was you just focused on just help him have a good time, have some fun, and the likelihood of him relaxing and maybe it clicking for him at some point in time, that makes all the difference. So So, Peter, with that, I'm going to wrap this up, and I'm going to see you in April. Thanks for the invite. I'm going to come and with the Trillium BMW Club in Toronto.
And we had you up 10 years ago. It's about time.
Yeah, every 10 years.
A whole bunch of new instructors that I'm sure could do with your insight.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, and so thanks for that invite. And so I'll see you in Toronto in April, and. I know I don't need to tell you this, but keep having fun out there on the track.
Okay, it's a long time till April. I'm going to focus. I want to watch some YouTube videos.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. Well, thanks Peter. And thanks for sharing with everybody, both in Speed Secrets Weekly with your articles. You've done a number of them. And And thanks for being on the show and sharing your insights here.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.
Here's this week's speed secret. Never stop experimenting. Yeah, I'm going to echo Peter's advice here. Too many drivers get into a rut with their driving and do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different and a better result. Where I see this a lot is with a driver who has changed cars and continues to drive the new one the same as he did the old one. Experiment. Try new techniques. Sure, there is always some risk involved with trying something new on the track, so approach this in a smart way. Like Peter talked about, think about it beforehand, especially if you have data that you can learn from. And then pick out 1 or 2 things to do differently. If all you do is learn what doesn't work, then you've become a better driver. And who knows, maybe you'll learn something new that does work. If you don't already subscribe to Speed Secrets Weekly and want to read Peter's article, 14 Ways to Improve Your Driving, then go to speedsecretsweekly.com, scroll to the bottom of the page and click on the Past Issues link in the footer menu and get issue 240. And if you don't subscribe to Speed Secrets Weekly, well, you're missing out. So thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you again next week. Till then, keep learning and having fun.